You didn't buy a memory chip this year. You didn't order one, didn't compare specs, didn't even know you needed one. And you paid for it anyway, probably more than once, through invoices that never once used the word memory. Here's the shape of it. A chip maker in South Korea raises a price. 11 weeks later, your company's cloud bill goes up. 14 weeks later, the laptop your IT department was going to replace this quarter costs 20% more than it did at budgeting time. Nobody in that chain lied to you. Nobody hid a fee. Every company along the way can show you the exact reason its own costs went up, and every single one of those reasons is true. That's the part that makes this different from a normal price hike. This isn't a shortage story, and it isn't a price gouging story. It's a story about how a cost can travel through 6 honest, well-documented, individually reasonable decisions and come out the other end as something that looks a lot like inflation, without a single point where anyone was doing anything wrong. We built the machine behind this in the last episode. Now we're going to watch what it's actually printing. Episode 21 built the semiconductor fab economics. Why AI data centers are outbidding everyone else for memory in the first place. This episode isn't relitigating that. This section is about what happens after the chip leaves the fab. The actual transmission belt that turns a supply reallocation in Weizong into a line item on a small business's server bill in Ohio. Layer 1, the memory makers. Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron together produce nearly all of the world's DRAM, and in 2026 all three have been doing the same thing, shifting wafer capacity away from conventional memory and toward high-bandwidth memory for AI accelerators, because HBM pays dramatically better. Footnote 1. Micron has put a number on the trade-off. Roughly 3 units of DDR5 capacity given up for every unit of HBM capacity gained. Footnote 2. This isn't a shortage in the sense of not enough factories. It's a shortage in the sense of the factories that exist have better things to make. Layer 2, the hyperscalers. This is where the story stops being abstract and starts showing up in earnings calls with real names attached. Microsoft's CFO Amy Hood told investors directly that $25 billion of the company's 2026 capital expenditure increase was attributable to rising memory chip and component costs. Footnote 3. Amazon did the same thing from the other direction. CEO Andy Jassy told investors the company was raising its 2026 cash capex guidance to roughly $220 billion, up from a prior $200 billion estimate, specifically because of higher memory prices. Footnote 4. These aren't rumors filtering up through trade press. These are the 2 largest cloud operators on Earth telling shareholders on the record that a memory shortage is adding tens of billions of dollars to their spending plans. Layer 3, the hardware makers. Dell's COO Jeff Clarke put it about as plainly as a corporate executive ever puts anything. He said he had never seen memory chip costs rise this fast. Footnote 5. Dell responded by raising PC prices 15 to 20% starting in mid-December 2025. Lenovo followed with its own increases from January 2026, warning customers that existing price quotes would expire on New Year's Day. Footnote 6. HP told investors that memory now makes up roughly 35% of a PC's bill of materials, up from 15 to 18% just 1 quarter earlier. Footnote 7. That's not a rounding change. That's a component category roughly doubling its share of what a laptop costs to build, in the space of a single quarter. Layer 4, everyone downstream of Layer 3, which is to say almost everyone. A memory chip that got more expensive at the fab is now baked into a cloud invoice, a laptop price tag, a server refresh budget, and, as Section 2 is about to show, a car, an MRI machine, and a power drill. Nobody at any single layer set out to raise your costs. Each one absorbed a real cost increase from the layer above it and passed along a proportional share to the layer below. That's not misconduct. That's the ordinary, defensible behavior of a business protecting its margin. Multiply it by 4 or 5 sequential layers, though, and the compounding starts to look a great deal like inflation that nobody actually voted for. Direct exposure, chips as a physical input. Automotive is the clearest case, and episode 21 already built the allocation fight underneath it. Data centers now outbidding car manufacturers for the same memory, the way luxury trims once outbid economy trims inside a single company's own production line. The chip count asymmetry compounds it. A laptop or a power tool might carry 1 to 3 chips. A modern vehicle carries dozens to hundreds. Footnote 8. When the per-chip price rises, a car doesn't absorb one price increase. It absorbs one price increase, multiplied across every chip on board. Medical device manufacturing runs the same math with less room to improvise. Diagnostic imaging equipment, infusion pumps, and monitoring systems all depend on specialized memory and processing components that can't simply be redesigned around a shortage on a 6-month timeline the way a consumer gadget sometimes can. Regulatory recertification alone makes rapid component substitution expensive and slow. Manufacturing broadly, industrial controllers, robotics, factory sensors, sits in a similar position. Highly chip-dependent, low substitutability, long product cycles that were priced out years before this shortage began. Home electronics and appliances are the most visible version to ordinary consumers. Gaming laptop prices are up sharply enough that Nvidia reportedly won't launch a new consumer GPU generation in 2026 at all. The first time in roughly 3 decades the company has skipped a launch year. Footnote 9. And TrendForce data shows memory's share of a laptop's total bill of materials climbing from roughly 15% to over 30% across several quarters of 2026 alone. Footnote 10. Power tools round out the direct exposure list. A lower chip count category than automotive, but one where the same memory and control chip cost pressure is showing up in the same bill of materials math as consumer electronics. Indirect exposure, the services layer. Cloud and hosting infrastructure is the cleanest indirect case, because the pass-through chain is now visible in named executives' own words, per Section 1. OVH Cloud has been the one transparent voice in the industry, publicly forecasting a 5 to 10% price increase between April and September 2026 and explicitly stating it chose not to pass on the full component cost increase to customers. Footnote 11. AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud, by contrast, have made no comparable public pricing announcement, not because they're immune to the same cost pressure, but because their scale and contract complexity give them more room to delay or phase an increase quietly. Footnote 12. The mechanism is the same either way. The only variable is who tells you about it. Enterprise device refresh cycles are the second indirect case, and arguably the most universal. This doesn't hit technology companies. It hits any employer that runs a standing laptop replacement policy. Two forces are colliding here. Windows 10's end of life is forcing many organizations to accelerate refresh programs on a fixed timeline, at the exact moment memory makers are pulling supply away from consumer devices. Footnote 13. Gartner has gone as far as forecasting that the sub-$500 PC segment could effectively disappear by 2028, as memory's rising share of the bill of materials makes that price point unsustainable to build at all. Footnote 14. SaaS and enterprise software is the third indirect case, but it needs a caveat the first two don't. Enterprise software vendors have been raising subscription prices at an annualized rate of roughly 12.2%, against general inflation of around 2.5%, even as the underlying AI infrastructure costs those features run on have been falling. Footnote 15. That's a real distinction worth stating plainly on air. Some of what's landing in a SaaS renewal invoice this year is genuine chip cost pass-through, and a larger share of it is vendor margin expansion riding on the same AI pricing wave, using the infrastructure got more expensive, as cover for increases the infrastructure cost alone doesn't explain. Both things are true. They are not the same thing, and treating them as identical would be exactly the kind of hedged, unclear claim the show's own sourcing standard exists to prevent. Insurance deliberately is not getting a case study here. It has real technology cost pressure. Industry technology spending is projected to rise roughly 7.8% in 2026. Footnote 16. But the dominant drivers cited across the reporting are climate catastrophe losses, social inflation from jury verdicts, and cyber risk, not chip prices specifically. Naming it and setting it aside, rather than compressing it into a sentence that implies fuller coverage, is the standard this show has held itself to since episode 16. The insulated contrast. Not everyone is on this ride. 45 of the top 50 banks, 8 of the top 10 insurers, and 4 of the top 5 airlines still run their mission-critical operations on mainframes, often COBOL systems 30 to 40 years old. Footnote 17. Roughly 43% of core banking systems worldwide are more than 2 decades old. Footnote 18. These institutions are not immune to technology cost pressure in general. One industry estimate puts Universal Bank's IT budget allocation to legacy maintenance at around 70%. Footnote 19. But that pressure is a different, slower-moving problem. A shrinking pool of COBOL-literate engineers and mainframe licensing costs, not the commodity drum spot market. IBM's own mainframe line runs on its proprietary Telum processor family, procured on long-cycle enterprise contracts entirely outside the memory market. Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron are currently squeezing. Footnote 20. The irony writes itself. The industries stuck on 40-year-old technology are, for this specific squeeze, better insulated than the industries buying the newest hardware money can buy. Every door has a locked room behind it. This one's different from every room we've shown you so far because for the first time, every door in the hallway is unlocked. Walk it yourself. Ask the memory maker why prices went up. They'll show you the HBM reallocation numbers. Ask the hyperscaler why their capex ballooned. Amy had already told you on the record in dollars. Ask the laptop manufacturer why your company's refresh budget didn't stretch as far this year. Jeff Clark will tell you he's never seen anything like it. Every single person in this hallway will show you their receipts. Every one of them is telling the truth. Nobody is hiding a markup, nobody is colluding, nobody is profiteering in any sense you could take to a regulator. And somehow, 6 honest transactions later, the bill has still tripled. This is the 15th distinct locked room this show has documented, and it's a genuinely new shape. Not a policy structure, not a hostage dynamic, not an institution with no defendant, not a scarcity someone is choosing to maintain. A cost diffusing itself across a chain of entirely legitimate, entirely defensible transactions, with no single link heavy enough to call the villain. Categorized honestly against all 14 prior variants. This is the first one where transparency itself is the mechanism, not the failure. Flagged for host confirmation per the standing rule that every new variant gets checked against every prior one, not just the most recent. Episode 21 closed on a policy reversal. After roughly a year of tightening, Washington loosened chip export controls to China in stages through December 2025 and January 2026, moving to case-by-case licensing with a 25% tariff routed to Treasury, against an active three-way tension between the executive branch, Congress, and industry. Footnote 21. That reversal doesn't sit outside this episode's story, it's connected to it directly. A diffuse, hard-to-blame inflation is, politically, a very different animal from a shortage with a named villain. A shortage invites a policy response: export controls, subsidies, a CHIPS Act. A cost that's diffused itself across 6 legitimate private transactions, with every party individually blameless, invites something closer to shrugged acceptance. There's no single actor for Congress to subpoena, no single company for a regulator to investigate, no clean narrative for a campaign ad. That's not a coincidence that favors any one side of the export control debate specifically, it's a structural fact about diffuse costs generally, and it's part of why this kind of inflation tends to persist longer than shortage-driven price spikes with an identifiable cause. That has a direct bearing on where the reckoning goes next. Which countries end up holding structural leverage when the cost of running an economy on chips keeps climbing regardless of who's selling to whom? Nobody in this story did anything wrong, and that's exactly the problem. A shortage with a villain gets fixed, eventually because someone has to answer for it. A cost that diffuses itself across a chain of honest, defensible, individually reasonable decisions doesn't have that pressure valve. It just keeps compounding, quietly, until it shows up in an invoice nobody can fully explain. The last 2 episodes showed you where the shortage comes from and how it spreads. The next one asks a different question. When the world's major economies can no longer count on a predictable trading partner, who actually benefits from the scramble, and who gets routed around entirely?